Hey guys, Mr. V over here, doing a book for you today for Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now before I go into my book review, I want you to know that I try to do a spoiler-free book review, so let's go into book review right now for Notes from the Underground. Now, this is a fictional book, and the main premise is a little hard to explain. I'll try to explain it a little bit throughout my review, but it is hard to explain. It was published in 1864 in Russia, so it was published quite a while ago, but it's still understandable today. Now, it is a fairly short book. The audio versions are about 4.5 hours. So you can see it's a fairly short book, but this is not one to be read quickly because this is a deep philosophical book that makes you think a lot when you are reading it. While it is fiction, it makes you think a lot because of some of the philosophies he throws at you. And it's hard to explain what it's about because it's basically two parts. The first part, you're kind of just reading about the thoughts and philosophy of the main character, who they call the underground man. He's a guy who kind of lives away from society. He's like in his 40s, and he's just sharing his thoughts with the reader. And he is someone who thinks negatively. He's a pretty angry person, and I could say he's somewhat crazy as well, because he can be nice on one page and then turn around and just be super negative and do something completely the opposite of what he said he was going to do the next page. So he's a little bit crazy in those regards. And as I said, it's broken into two parts. The first part, you're just reading about his opinions on life and his civilization and people. And when you're reading these things that the underground man is sharing with you, it makes you think a lot because they are true philosophies that people think about. So you want to be prepared from the beginning going in. That just has a very different start than most fictional books. And even when you're reading it, you don't really know where it is going. Other people online felt the same. Some people I looked on were like, what is even happening in the story? But, stick with it. Because that's like about the first third of the book. You're reading the main character, the underground man's, his thoughts. And you get to read the thoughts of basically this angry man. He even says how he is a spiteful person and how he gets enjoyment out of spite. He enjoys doing that and talks about the desire people have for revenge. So you can kind of tell that I think he's kind of an angry person and wants revenge as well. And he's kind of sharing all this in the first third. And he just seems bitter about life and bitter about humanity and just thinks people are weak. And he just shares a lot of interesting thoughts, many thoughts. Some of the interesting ones, like he says that like people will moan more than they need to, and how people get pleasure out of annoying others. He compared it to like a toothache, and how moaning doesn't cure the person, but it gives them pleasure by just keeping everyone else up at night and just annoying everyone else. So you can see how spiteful he is about life. And he states how people don't always act in their best interest, that if everything was perfect, would everyone still act rationally? And how the underground man says that life would get boring and that some people would start to act irrationally just for the freedom of desire, or basically, the free will you have to prove your individuality. And that was a big theme back in the 1860s Russia. And, he's trying to show that in this. And, he kind of shows some of those philosophical things. And there's many thoughts he has to start the story. There's many more. I just gave you two, but he says so many more. And that's about the first third of the book. So you get a really good idea of who this character is before he even starts like his official story. You get to really go deep into the character's mind. And that's why before he even starts the story, you know who the character is. Then after the first third, the rest of the book starts. And he goes he goes back about 20 years and how he handles specific areas of life. And these are areas he wants to share with you. And how he dealt with his enemies, how he tried to make friends, even how he acted in a brothel and what happened. And you just get to see some of the big events that happened in this guy's life. And it kind of shows you how he became bitter, what happened in his life that made him think this way about people, or how he gives philosophies and why he acts this way now, and, or why he acted that way before. And it's just so much that it's definitely a interesting story. I can say that. It's definitely interesting. It's hard to explain without reading it, but it's an interesting story. But, you want to be prepared because this is not your typical story. This is not. Because, as I said, the first part, it is fiction, yet he's giving you these, like, philosophies and all that. And then the next part, he goes about parts of life. So, again, it just doesn't feel like your typical fictional story, but it is fictional. And it is interesting. Now, be prepared because part 1 can be a little difficult. Others online felt the exact same as I did, that there was times I was like wondering like what's going on, but I think it helps going in knowing that that's going to happen, and that part 2 he will become a little more like engaged in the story. But just be prepared for that because he does use some weird analogies, so just go in with that kind of mind. But they are interesting. Hearing this underground man's thoughts are definitely interesting because while it is a fictional book, he gives you these deep philosophical thoughts. So that's why you don't want to go into this book thinking this is going to be like an easy read. Online, I read someone thought it was just going to be like a book that he can read on the nightstand. I would not recommend that. You really want to think while you're reading this book, because sometimes you'll read a chapter and just put it down and think for at least an hour about it. So, just don't go into this book thinking this is going to be an easy one. Just because it's a short book does not mean it's easy. And something I always find interesting is that while this was published in 1864 Russia, many of the philosophies are pretty true today. And it kind of shows that like humans don't really change that much. And I always find that very interesting when I read some of the books that are like 100 or 150 years old. I always find that interesting to read that kind of stuff. And this is a book that I will probably want to read in the future. After I finish it, I thought I'll probably want to read it in the future because I think it's a book that I will appreciate more with multiple readings. Because I kind of feel mixed after reading it. I'll give it my official rating in just a sec, but I think I'll appreciate it more on multiple readings. But I'll see. Maybe in a few years I'll read it again and, see how I feel about it. But let me give it my official rating now. So I was rating my book on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book, a 5 is an average, and a 10 is phenomenal. Because anywhere near 10, put it on your reading list because I'm a very tough critic. And a 5 is average. Now, I went back and forth on this book about how to rate it. I went back and forth for a few different ratings. But remember, a 5 is average. But I'm going to settle for this book giving it a 5.5. Now, that's just above average, but that still is pretty good in my rating because a 5 is average. And again, I'm a tough critic, but the reason I gave it a 5.5, as I said, I went back and forth on what to give it. Was it below average, average, above average? It was really tough because, this book made me think a lot, which was a lot of fun. But sometimes it is a bit difficult to understand, and it wasn't your typical fictional, like story-driven type of book at times. So it can be a little crazy at times. And that's why I'm giving it just a little bit above average because it still had that stuff and it still did have some stories. So it's kind of mixed. And that's why it was definitely difficult to rate. But if you are considering it, I would say, go for it. Just don't go in with a thing that's going to be an easy read. But if you guys have any comments, you guys have any questions, post it in the comment section below because I love to hear your comments. I hope you guys hit the subscribe button as I always upload multiple different book reviews. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.